مرحبا وأهلا بكم في برنامج داخل واشنطن. معكم مضيفكم روبرت ساتلوف. يحب الناس في أنحاء العالم الأفلام الأمريكية، ويوجد نوع خاص من الأفلام يسمى أفلام الغرب الأمريكي. وأشهر أفلام الغرب على إطلاق يحكي قصة يكاد كل أمريكي يعرفها، تسمى واقعة تبادل إطلاق النار في مزرعة أوكي. في ذلك المشهد المحوري يقتل رجال القانون والخارجون عليه ورعاية البقر بعدهم حتى يموتون جميعا تقريبا. مرحبا بكم في المرحلة التالية من الانتخابات الرئاسية التمهيدية. الجانب الديمقراطي تدور مبارزة بين اثنين من أقدم المرشحين في التاريخ، سيدة أولى الوزيرة الخارجية السابقة في مواجهة سيناتور اشتراكي يعشقه الشباب. وعلى الجانب الجمهوري يجري صراع على نمط أفلام الغرب الأمريكي، حيث يستهدف الجميع كل من القائد دونالد ترامب وبعدهم. كيف سينتهي هذا الأمر؟ لا يعرف، ولكن ضيفينا يعرفان. يسرني أن أرحب باللجنة المكونة من الخبيرين السياسيين نورمان أورنستين وراي لوكر. Welcome back to Dakhel, Washington. We're here to discuss American politics with a panel of Norm Ornstein and Ray Locker. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us this morning. So we now have some presidential tests. Real voters went to the polls and offered their views. And so there's what to learn from the results. So let's start with the Democrats. Norm, what do we now know about this Democratic race for president?
What we know about this race is that it's going to go on for a very long period of time. Most people expected when this began, and you had effectively two significant candidates, but one towering one, Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders, that by the early part of March it would pretty much be over, and Clinton would be able to stockpile money and build this base of support more broadly, prepare for her convention. Now it's very clear that the Democratic contest is going to go on for a very long period of time. Bernie Sanders has raised a staggering sum of money, so he can keep going even if he hits some rough spots, as he likely will a little bit further down the road. And while Clinton is still the likely nominee, it's going to be a struggle to get there, which is not what we expected before we had Iowa followed by New Hampshire.
Ray, is it possible that the American people will elect a socialist as their president?
No. I mean, they may elect a socialist if they don't know he's a socialist, but they're not going to elect somebody like Bernie Sanders, who espouses the things that he believes in. He could win the Democratic nomination. I doubt it. But we see what happens when a Democrat with that kind of track record runs against a Republican in a general election. They take the tax increase issue and they pound him over the head with it, and that always works. And no matter what Sanders and his people believe now, that would happen if he got the nomination. I don't see him winning, ever.
Sanders on the Democratic side and Ted Cruz, who we'll talk about a little bit later on the Republican side, have a similar thesis, and that is there's a silent majority of voters out there who have not voted in the past because they haven't been excited to do so. And I can now excite them and bring them out. And that's what Sanders says he can do with young voters. Now, there's no evidence on either side that that's accurate. And actually, if you look at the turnout in New Hampshire, it was less than it was when Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton ran in 2008. And I think if there's an analogy here that Ray has indirectly alluded to, it's George McGovern, who ran as the Democrat in 1972, thought he could bring all these young voters out because of the opposition to the Vietnam War, and of course he got trounced. You can just
Trumped, I think, would be the word.
Yes.
Right?
You can just imagine what $1 billion from outside billionaire funders on the Republican side, the Koch brothers and others, would do to take on somebody who calls himself a socialist and who is calling for huge tax increases.
I mean, it would be relentless. And the McGovern analogy, which I was going to go to later, is exactly right. I mean, he got pounded by Nixon, ultimately vindicated by history later when Nixon had to resign, but in a contest, even with somebody as flawed as any Republican nominee, a guy with that kind of track record is probably going to lose.
So let's come back to the Hillary Clinton campaign for a moment. Hovering above her or below her is the stench of an investigation, the email issue. There's always a lot of chatter in Washington about this. Can you try in fairly simple terms to explain for our Arab viewers what is really going on here and whether this is a serious issue that could emerge as we proceed down the campaign?
Well, what we have to say first is it becomes a serious issue if somehow Hillary Clinton got indicted, or even if one of the people very close to her did. I think the odds of that are very small. What this involves is, in an underlying way, a serious dispute between the State Department and the intelligence community over what should be classified and how it should be classified. This has been going on for a very long time. It reached a peak here because Mrs. Clinton, as Secretary of State, did something that no other Secretary of State had done, which is to have all of her emails done through a private account. Previous Secretaries of State have had private accounts, but they also had a State Department one as well. So thousands of emails went through there. None of them, it appears, were classified with the markings on them at the time. They couldn't be because of the way they'd set up the accounts. But many have been retroactively classified, and some as top secret. So this is an embarrassment. It goes on for a significant period of time. It's now going through a formal FBI investigation. It will be a weight upon her, especially given, of course, the fact that in the past the Clintons have a history of having all kinds of problems that weigh them down politically. I don't think for most Democrats it's going to end up being a big issue, and I doubt very much that it will lead to the nuclear blast of an indictment.
We see this in politics all the time in Washington. People get nervous about things because it's not predictable. This is something that's not predictable. There's the fear of a possible indictment. Like Norm said, I don't believe anybody is going to get indicted for this. It's not as if they created this server and people at the State Department who worked with Hillary Clinton were pumping secret documents to her that were clearly labeled that way. And I've seen multiple documents, you know, in the time that I've worked here that have been classified. And you go, why was this ever classified? Sometimes they get declassified in a heartbeat if they want the information to come out. So classification is something that's very loosely handled here in town. People who really believe in it strongly. I don't think it, in the ultimate, end of this thing is going to be something that's going to hurt her one way or the other.
You know, one funny element to this, I saw a story in a conservative newspaper. Hundreds of people saw a top secret email that had come to Secretary Clinton. And it turns out it was basically forwarding a New York Times story about a drone attack. Now, the intelligence community will not even acknowledge that there are such things as drone attacks. So newspaper articles that acknowledge it, if they come through any kind of official source, they view as acknowledging something that is top secret, and so that becomes top secret. So it wasn't that hundreds of people saw it. Millions of people actually saw it. It was a newspaper article.
All right, so you're both lowering the fear level that this could derail her campaign, but you can't be happy where you are if you're Hillary Clinton today. You haven't scored a significant victory yet. Maybe you'll have it very soon, but not yet, and everyone thought you had a cakewalk. Would you imagine that someone like Joe Biden or some other Democrat is honing his or her stump speech, and is there time for any of that to occur?
I think Joe Biden could give his stump speech in a heartbeat. I think it's programmed into his brain, and that if something does happen to her, sure, he could be a person who could step in and fill the void. I don't think, that the people, the superdelegates in the Democratic Party see Bernie Sanders as their nominee. They would go to somebody like Biden way before they would opt for Sanders if they had the opportunity to do so.
One thing you have to keep in mind is there are deadlines for being able to get into these primary campaigns, just as there are deadlines down the road to qualify on a fall election campaign. Those deadlines are approaching pretty rapidly. So unless Secretary Clinton blows up and gets out of the race within a matter of 2 or 3 weeks, there's almost no opening for another candidate to get in, and delegates will just keep piling up as you go through these primaries. So we're not going to see some savior come along if something happens. On your larger point, this is a very rough time for Secretary Clinton. Bernie Sanders is raising money through the internet. He doesn't have to go out and fundraise. He now has more money at this point than Hillary Clinton does, which is pretty astonishing. She has to go out and do fundraisers, even as she has to campaign week after week in these primaries and caucuses. She may not do nearly as well as initially expected, but I think there's little doubt when you move to the South, it's dominated by African American voters in most of those states. That's delegate-rich territory. She has an enormous advantage there, and she's tying herself to Barack Obama, getting distance from Bernie Sanders, who said some very critical things about Obama. Obama has a 90+% approval rating, 95% among African Americans. That'll help her as well.
So I wanted to ask about this. Senator Clinton, Secretary Clinton's strategy is to embrace the president, essentially to run for the third term. Is this a winning strategy?
It can be. I don't think she has much of an alternative. She worked in his administration. She did many of the things that he wanted to do. She spoke on behalf of many of the things that he wanted. She can't separate himself from the Obama administration, and she probably shouldn't. Sanders has never been part of that crowd. He has been critical of the president for a long time from the left, but nobody cared about it because nobody took Bernie Sanders seriously. So when she gets into the more contested parts of this primary campaign where she has to rely on black voters, Hispanic voters, the Obama record helps her, and it would be wise of her to do that. In November, depends who she's running against. I think Obama could probably beat, if he ran for a third term, any of the leading Republican candidates right now.
You know, she will probably be able to pivot a little bit to show that it would not simply be an extension of Obama by the time she gets to the fall. In New Hampshire, Bernie Sanders won by more than 20 points. It was an astonishing victory. But when you look a little bit deeper, Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders divided the Democrats in that primary. Independents could vote. The independents were what gave Sanders his huge victory. We move on from here to races, many more of which are going to be dominated by people who are registered as Democrats before the contests occur. There, the tie to Obama is a particularly positive one for her. Now, of course, Obama's approval rating has been hovering for many, many months between 46 and 50%. Generally speaking, you're going for an open contest with no incumbent running. The party of the president, you want that president to be over 50%. If his approval rating is down around 40% by the time we get to the fall, you can bet that whoever the nominee is, if it's Secretary Clinton or Bernie Sanders, they're going to be getting a lot of distance from him.
Yeah.
Okay, when we come back, we're going to move from the duel between these two candidates to the shootout at the OK Corral among the Republicans in just a moment. So our panel of political experts includes Norman Ornstein. Sitting to his left is Ray Locker. Ray is the Washington Enterprise editor for USA Today. So gentlemen, we just talked about Nixon. Let's move to the Republicans. What do we now know? Ray, let's start with you. What do we know about the Republicans after the contests we've seen so far?
Well, I think after New Hampshire, Donald Trump erased many of the doubts that people had in the Iowa caucus about his ability to remain the front runner. Iowa was an organizational battle. He had no real organization, still did pretty well in second, but in New Hampshire, led the field by 20 points over his next closest competitor, Ohio Governor John Kasich, and he's a factor. He's continues to get tons of free media. He has his own money, which he's not really spending, and he's running against a fragmented field, and I think that helps him.
Norm?
Back in the fall of last year, the pundit class, the people who comment on this, and most Republican observers said, don't worry about Donald Trump. He has a ceiling of support of about 25%, and there's no way you can win a nomination with that. Around the time of the New Hampshire primary, the pundit class and the Republican establishment were saying, well, okay, maybe it's a ceiling of 35%, but there's no way you can win a nomination with that. After New Hampshire, the first big poll, 44% for Donald Trump. So it's not clear at all what the ceiling is. There's a substantial amount of enthusiasm for Trump. As you move to the big set we call Super Tuesday of primary, if they're going to stop Trump, they're going to have a difficult time. And the big distinction this time from previous election campaigns is you don't have one establishment figure that everybody is coalescing around. Trump and Ted Cruz, who also has deep strength in the primaries to come because he's strong with the evangelical Christians, could well be dominant factors, and by the time the establishment gets its act together, it may be too late for them.
That's exactly right. I mean, you have three lanes in the Republican primary. You got Trump, Cruz, and the establishment. And they need to match up in these big Super Tuesday states against the other two, because that's where all the energy in the Republican Party among the establishment figures, the political class who know who will play well in November.
You know, 4 years ago, you had the mirror opposite. You had one establishment candidate, Mitt Romney. All the others wanted to be the anti-Romney, and they formed a circular firing squad, destroying each other. This time, it's the anti-establishment candidate standing there. The establishment ones are forming that circular firing squad. Now, the one to keep an eye on is Cruz. Cruz has lots of money inside his campaign, outside with these super PACs with billionaire funders. He has a very sophisticated ground operation to get voters out to the polls and identify the ones that are with him. He has that evangelical support, and it's entirely possible that he could emerge as the major alternative to Trump and very possibly still win a nomination. Those two, Trump and Cruz, are clearly the front runners right now, and that's causing enormous heartburn in an establishment that suddenly has lost control of its own party.
Are there any issues, we've been talking all personalities, are there any issues that we've seen emerge, either ones we expected or ones we didn't expect, that are at the heart of what we're talking about? Or is it really a personality game?
Well, to me, it's a personality game. I mean, the issues that Trump seems to rely on are more outsidery issues. He's a populist. He talks about the competence of other people. His campaign is basically, based on insults of the other candidates. You don't really see him talking about, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z in any kind of specifics. He talks about, we're going to build a wall and Mexico is going to pay for it. Well, nobody believes that's going to happen. But his supporters don't seem to care because he is giving voice to some frustration they have about something either in politics or society, and they're not looking to him for specifics.
There is the underlying issue here on the Republican side, overwhelmingly, is immigration. Donald Trump was not a major figure until he took the most strident position on immigration, talked about Mexican rapists, said he would build the wall and make Mexico pay for it, said he would deport the 11 to 12 million undocumented people who are here in this country. He skyrocketed to prominence. Ted Cruz used as leverage against Marco Rubio the immigration issue, saying Rubio now says he'll take a tough line, but he supported a comprehensive bill, and I'm the pure one here. Now that is a grab bag. It's part of this underlying populism, a distrust of the establishment. It's why Sanders emerged on the Democratic side. It's why you've got Trump and Cruz on the Republican side. But the immigration issue, and of course Trump now saying we won't let any Muslims into the country, which is another part of the same thing, is playing to a base. When you get populism, you get nativism, and you get a fear of the outside. When you have a sluggish economy, which is when populism emerges, you also have this fear of people taking your jobs or reducing your wages, and the immigration issue plays into that. Now, how that works in a general election campaign, one thing it would do if you have a Trump or a Cruz nomination, you're going to get a very substantial turnout of Hispanic Americans, and they're not going to vote for a Republican.
So as of today, when we're filming, the two candidates who've received the most votes are Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump from their respective parties. Is there a chance that they will be the candidates on the ballot in November?
There's always a chance. I mean, people vote and they can decide what they want. I think Trump has a greater chance of becoming the Republican nominee than Sanders does of being the Democratic nominee, specifically for some of the reasons that Norm mentioned on the Democratic side with the demographics. Clinton does so much better with Hispanic and black voters, and I think that's going to help her. Trump, on the other hand, I don't know how they knock him out. Is Cruz going to knock him out? He's not a very appealing candidate to a lot of people. That's why there's such agita among Republican leaders, Republican political operatives. They see both those guys, Trump and Cruz, as stone cold losers in November, specifically because of the immigration diversity issue.
Yeah, I think it is possible that you could have both of them. If you do, you're going to see another phenomenon that's talked about a lot now by many in our political class, which is a third candidate entering the race. Could it be a Michael Bloomberg? I don't think it happens unless you get this polar opposite, a Trump or Cruz against a Sanders. Even if it did, there is almost no chance that an independent could get elected, because in the American political system you have to win electoral votes. You have to win 270 of them, and that means you have to win a large number of large states. You're going to divide the votes three ways, and you may throw an election into the House of Representatives, which would be a true nightmare. We've got the possibilities of some nightmares ahead.
Gentlemen, thank you for scaring our viewers. Good to have you on the show, and we'll see when we meet again in the future whether we're still talking about the candidates that dominated our discussion today. Thank you. بهذا نصل إلى نهاية هذه الحلقة من برنامج داخل واشنطن. إذا كانت لديكم أي استفسارات أو تعليقات حول هذه الحلقة، وخاصة حول الزلزال السياسي في أمريكا اليوم، أرجو أن تراسلوني مباشرة على عنوان البريد الإلكتروني التالي insidewashington@alhurra.com. معكم روبرت ساتلوف، شكرا لكم وإلى اللقاء.